pill, orange pill, orange pill.
It isn't blue, it isn't red, orange. What?
Why do you always mangle that song, especially in this episode, when upcoming in this episode, we have an interview with Sean Lennon.
Oh, yeah, it isn't red, it isn't blue. Orange pill is here for you.
Here for you.
Yeah.
Here for you.
What if you're colorblind? You know, nobody's colorblind in Bitcoin because orange coin knows no race, creed, or color. It's pure. It's pure. It's the purest of the pure.
It's so pure. Hey, Max, you know, the most important, insightful, interesting question we had this entire week was somebody asked you if you have ever vaped toad.
All right. You know, toad is underappreciated as an hallucinogenic, right? So the secretions of the toad, not all toads, but some toads, if vaped, you will have a psychedelic experience. This is very popular around Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, where the toads there secrete an inordinate amount of psychedelic excretions. And be careful, though, because some people start to smoke some of the defecation of the toad, and that will not work.
You know, speaking of defecation of the toad, there's that problem with, toxoplasmosis of the brain from cat poop. And this story caught my eye this week, before I go into the big theme of the metaphysical, is here's this headline: Hear me out. Get it? Me out. Inventors of a new app claim it can translate what your cat is saying when it purrs. The creators of Mao Talk say it can identify 13 meanings, including feed me, leave me alone, and I'm in love. If you've ever had a cat, like you quickly learn cat, like you don't need an app to tell you that he or she is telling you, shut the fuck up, bitch, and go get me some lunch. Go make my lunch.
Yeah, you don't need an app for that. Now, this is for machines that are interacting with cats. Humans already know what cats say because they've been coexisting for thousands of years. But machines that are now running much of the world, they don't really know what cats are saying. So it's an app for machines to understand what cats are saying.
Because we, as humans, I think we got infected with that toxoplasmosis, and 33% of all humans are infected with this parasite in our brain. So the cats infected us that's their algorithm for us. That helps us understand what they said. My cat talked to me all the time. Rocky, I had her for 14 years. I obeyed her, whatever she said. And, I told the story where she used to leave me presents, I thought, for my entire life. Dead birds, dead mice on the porch almost every morning. And then I realized, how did the toxoplasmosis that she gave me must have caused me to think it was a present when actually it was a threat. She was threatening me this whole time. She was sending a warning message to me about making sure I listened to her faster, speedier, get it together, Stacy.
All right, toxoplasmosis. This is the kitty cat version of Bitcoin. A lot of traders on Wall Street purposefully infect themselves with this. They eat cat poop, hoping that they eliminate all empathy and that they can trade more impactfully. And that's its truth. You can look that up.
Right. That's actually a number one search term on Google. If you start to enter toxoplasmosis, it says, do cats put a parasite in your brain?
Yeah, they do. It's worse than Jamie Dimon's parasitical nature when he puts the parasite of fiat money into your brain. It affected politicians around the world.
Right. I want to give you the definition of metaphysical according to dictionary.com on online. Of course, Max and I interact with you and the show through the internet, and of course the cats run the internet. So, this could be some form of toxoplasmosis as we speak, like this show itself, Orange Pill Podcast.
That is clearly the truth.
Metaphysical, an adjective based on abstract, typically excessively abstract reasoning, transcending physical matter or the laws of nature. And they give, for an example, good and evil are inextricably linked in a metaphysical battle across space and time. So Knut Svanholm, he says, he subtweeted us, by the way. He didn't actually tweet at us, but he was subtweeting us, right? This is like the taxoplasmosis sort of way of communicating. The notion that Bitcoin is metaphysical or divine is ridiculous. Bitcoin is about the most straightforward expression of a distrust in anything that can't be mathematically proven there is. Not being a gullible moronic sheep is not supernatural. Quite the opposite. You responded to him, knowing is owning is a metaphysical concept that requires a leap of faith. The illusion of control is the root of all anxiety.
Right. So Knut is self-described atheist. And he also goes on in that tweet thread to talk about if you don't have control, then it's not really real. Like he equates control with reality. And also, okay, that's fine. Atheism's fine and people's opinions are fine. But I pointed out that the quote that I'm saying there, that knowing is owning, comes directly from his work and the film he just put out. And that is, by any definition, a metaphysical concept. He says that Bitcoin has nothing to do with metaphysics or divine or the divine. Okay, well, his statement, that is the guiding principle of his work currently, as I understand it, is a metaphysical statement. So there's a complete contradiction there, and contradictions are fine too. Paradoxes are fine too. I think that I have not been dissuaded from my argument that Bitcoin has metaphysical divine qualities, that it's self-aware, that it's God hacking us to try to rectify a problem here on planet Earth amongst the humans. That's not dissuading me by making contradictory statements. That he's contradicting yourself. I mean, if you have a thought, it should be consistent.
Like, we actually know less about reality than we know about reality. That's the great unexplored. That's what where humans are always trying to discover. And, you know, we come up with mystical sort of things like dark matter to explain the fact that we can't see apparently 75% of reality. We know it's there, but we can't see it. And our consciousness evolves, our way of looking at things evolves. All that we know evolves, like the way we look at the universe around us evolves. So, you know, that is divine in its own sort of way. You know what? Da Vinci, you know, we always talk about the Mona Lisa. And one thing about the Mona Lisa, they say, is that if you look at her straight on, the human eyes, the way we interpret data, we actually can't see shadows very well straight on. But from the periphery, we can see her smiling at us. So as soon as you turn away from the Mona Lisa, she starts to smile at you. So you, of course, look back and you're like, did you just smile at me? So like, there's this way of knowing is by not looking straight on, right? Straight on is mathematics. But there are other ways to know Bitcoin, and that is the divine and metaphysical.
Right. Well, I just think that, you know, it's an interesting conversation because first of all, we're on parallel paths. We have different visions. So there's no Venn diagram where Knut's ideas and my ideas are overlapping in any way. It's like two parallel visions. And I believe he has kind of self-described as an atheist, and okay, that's interesting. But I'm just saying that in that statement about stating his position, he's talking about that metaphysics and divine qualities of Bitcoin and metaphysics don't really apply to Bitcoin. But then he wraps it in the most metaphysical concept of Bitcoin of the year, that knowing is owning. That's the most metaphysical thing that's ever been said about Bitcoin in 2020. More than anything Michael Saylor has said, more than anything that Robert Breedlove has said. It's more than anything I've even said. I pointed this out and saying, this is like a leap above anything I'm even saying, because the implications of knowing is owning are deep and profound. And there's a little video that Knut is, I guess, produced, and it's an excellent, and it's only a couple minutes long, but it goes into these metaphysical qualities of Bitcoin. Now, I mean, it goes into some different aspects of the protocol and the hashing algorithm and a lot of other aspects to it, and then it goes back and forth a little bit, but nothing said here has dissuaded me from what I've been saying now for almost 10 years, that Bitcoin was a bit of an industrial accident as far as we're concerned, and it has qualities of divine intervention. I haven't seen the argument against that yet.
Right. Descartes, of course, he came up with the notion, I think, therefore I am. So that's kind of in the vein of knowing is owning. He also is, Cartesian mathematics is his invention as well. And, all of those profound philosophical ideas of his, like I think, therefore I am, and his Cartesian calculus and contributions to mathematics, he said came from God, right? That he was visited by an angel while he was sleeping.
Right. I mean, this is something, look, I mean, atheists are going to, they start from a place where there is no God. So, it's really tough to have a discussion where there's a spiritual godlike component to it. I mean, we're never going to have a discussion where there's a lot of overlapping things. We can kind of approach Bitcoin from these two different vectors, I think, and that is useful. I mean, everything he's doing is great, and I follow him, and he's a deep thinker, and his contributions are vast. It's just we don't overlap on this. But so far, if you see the way the community is turning, in the last 12 months, the community is getting very metaphysical, spiritual, and divinely inspired. We've left kind of the hardcore hacker days of the 2011 to 2014 period. We've left the charlatan phase of the ICOs and the DeFi. We're into a very spiritual time now in Bitcoin. I mean, the leading influencers in Bitcoin, Michael Saylor, Robert Breedlove, and others, they are quick to get right into the spiritual, metaphysical qualities of it.
So, this is beyond physics, right? It's beyond the physical world, and it's beyond, as I say, it's transcendental. So that's beyond any of your sort of touch, feel, taste, smell, like any of those sort of senses that you have. Like there's a sixth sense, a deeper sense. So when Einstein, the great mathematician, he calculated the notion of black holes because of looking at time space. He knew that he mathematically figured out black holes first, for example. And it was only not through looking directly. We can't see a black hole directly, but we could see it just like Mona Lisa's smile from the periphery, because from the periphery, humans are better at seeing shadows, right? Apparently you can see shadows better from the periphery than straight on. So the same with looking at the universe around us. There are some things that are just better seen and understood kind of from the peripheral consequences of its existence or our experience with it. That's why when a lot of people in the early days of Bitcoin back in 2010, 2011, and 2012, they were looking at it straight on. And they thought it was like a new PayPal, a new Visa, a new MasterCard. And this is what they saw because they were looking straight on. But as you're hanging around with it for more and more years, you kind of start to see it out of the corner of your eye. And you're like, wait, I just saw that. Like, what is this?
Right. If you go down the path of atheism and there is no God and Bitcoin is purely an empirical subset of mathematical calculations derived by mathematicians, you would come up with the thought, let's say, of Mike Hearn, who believed that the Bitcoin mining would enter a death spiral and the coin would go out of business. He rage quit. He sold all of his Bitcoin like under 2,000 or under 1,000. I think it was maybe under 1,000. But because he didn't understand the metaphysical aspect of this. He didn't understand how the difficulty adjustment actually is playing us. It knows us better than we know it. What's unknown about Bitcoin is vastly greater than what is known about Bitcoin because it
Yes.
interacts with our global unconscious, our global psyche in ways that we have not yet really gotten a firm grasp on and may never ever really truly understand.
Right, because if it were just mathematics, if there were nothing metaphysical and divine about it, then it could be replaced by another mathematical equation. And that's the same thing with Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. If you look at it, Raphael created 2 Mona Lisas, copying Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Several other masters of the Renaissance also copied the Mona Lisa, but none of them are the Mona Lisa.
Right. You have the spirituality, you have religion. So in the case of religion, which I think is watered down spirituality in many ways, and all religions are watered down spirituality, and one of them happens to be Christianity. And one of the myths of Christianity is that God sent down his only son, Jesus, who is half man, half God. As a matter of fact, he's the Father, he's the Son, he's the Holy Ghost. He's a triptych. And so, and that nobody could compete with Jesus, even though there were many prophets of the day. There was only one Jesus of the day because he had connection to God. As this religion took hold, that was the concept of monotheistically worshiping the one and only God. And so Jesus was his connection to that. So this idea is already in our minds. It's already the ghost in the machine is already there, but it's not scalable, right? Christianity doesn't scale the way Bitcoin scales. Bitcoin scales universally to all humans because it's frictionless. It involves perfect price discovery. So that means that all markets are in perfect sync. And that means the whole concept of money changes radically in an instant that you understand what's going on here. So your values as a human being suddenly are transitioned away from the border. That's where knowing is owning comes into it. Because if knowing is owning, then the borders of private property are completely porous. Because the thoughts in your mind are porous. The thoughts in your mind are not segregated in any way that your mind can't easily go from one hemisphere to the other back and forth and create your reality. The same thing is true in the physical world, but we don't recognize it as such, or we put these barriers and fences around that private property, that country, that bank. But in fact, with Bitcoin, all those barriers disappear, those hard barriers. We have we replace more voluntary barriers and voluntarily put in there for the facilitation of a greater spiritual connection, as we do already have in our mind. And so that's what knowing is owning is all about. It's about the physical world as it's expressed by private property and money is seamlessly mapped to your and the global unconscious mind. I mean, that's what it means. That's metaphysical. How can you say that's not metaphysical? So the author of that statement, as I understand it, is Canute. And then when he says something like, I don't believe in metaphysical, metaphysics, I'm like, well, that's an odd thing to say because you're known for your metaphysical statement. So, that's interesting. It's an interesting paradox. I'll say that. And Bitcoin is rife with paradoxes, certainly. And this is another paradox, and it's not good nor bad. It is what it is.
Well, it's a good time at this metaphysical moment to jump to another realm, which is our interview with Sean Lennon.
Yeah.
It isn't red. It isn't blue.
Yeah, those are awesome lyrics. I was going through online looking for some music, and somebody said, you got to listen to this Claypool Lennon Delirium record. Blood and Rockets is the track, right? So I got it. I'm listening to it. Like, this guy, Sean Lennon, seems like a pretty decent talent.
He seems orange-pilled.
Let's get him on the show.
Sean,
thanks, guys.
Welcome to Orange Pill. Everybody in the audience, of course, knows you for Orange Pill theme
except
tune.
that one guy. I'm watching you. He doesn't know me. But he's going to know me now.
The biggest question we get from the Orange Pill podcast Telegram group is when you're going to do a full-length album of Orange Pill podcast theme tune.
Yeah, well, it's, I've got so many in the bank, just ready to come out. I'm just trying to pick the right time.
Yeah, well, I was thinking maybe also we could do a musical version of the Orange Pill theme tune. I think that would be great. Take Broadway by storm.
Actually, Max just wants to do some pole dancing again. I don't know if you saw the story from in the news this week that there are only
Is that how you
15
work out?
Yeah, there's only 15 lesbian bars left in all of America, down from 200 in the 80s.
What? I think I've been to all of them.
Max used to do go-go dancing at a lesbian bar in Manhattan called Trudy Heller's.
Yeah. There's a great
There's
one
so
in
much
Atlanta.
to unpack in that statement that I'm not sure where to begin. That first of all, I just feel like a deep sense of jealousy that I was never able to witness that. But also, it's hard from your explanation whether or not Max pole dancing in these bars, are you saying is connected in some way to them going out of business, or is that a separate and parallel
No,
timeline?
this is during the thriving days of the 1970s, right? So, and it's also overlaps a very important period in musical history, disco, right? So I'm really child of disco, to tell you the truth. I mean, I'm more Donna Summer, Madonna, and Studio 54. That was me in New York.
Did you get
and-
into Studio 54?
Yeah, a couple of times,
Wow.
because my couple of friends and whatever. Yeah, sure. I mean, that was the place to go. But there's so many great clubs at that time. My favorite was Save the Robots.
Oh my God,
down-
I've been to Save the Robots. It was like they would stay open till like 5 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. 5 a.m.
Or
And
10
then from
a.m.
there
or
you go to, there was
and there was
after-
sand in the ground.
Yeah.
I probably saw you there. Like that place was interesting.
What
it was
there?
kind of like
What did you say there was in the ground?
Save the Robots. Well, at least when I went there, the few times there was an area where it was like a beach on the ground. It was really trippy, but
Yeah, indoor beach. That was awesome.
yeah, it was a beach.
Yeah.
Right. You know what? When we were going to interview you last week, and you went totally rock and roll and just like skipped town, right?
I
So-
just wanted you guys to appreciate when I did show up. It's a psychological technique.
So we were talking.
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry about that. I
No.
feel terrible.
Well, we were talking about, this trend in Spain where they keep on turning these masterpieces of medieval art into weird blobby, fuzzy pieces of nothingness, right? So you have like
Is that like a metaphor for all of civilization since the Renaissance?
yes, this is exactly what we
Nice.
said.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. Right.
Thank you.
That's why we're having Sean on the show here because he is orange pilled. When we first met you in Paris in 2011, and I have some photos that I'll put on the page right here. Is like we were talking about Bitcoin back then, so you were already orange pilled back then, and I kind of think of you as a Renaissance man because. I mean,
Thank you.
everybody knows you for your music, but you do a lot of, you're an amazing artist and like really
thanks.
interested in all sorts of crazy stuff like outer space and space weather and space travel, which has now become really popular.
Well, I
Elon
was
Musk-
a fan of your guys' show. I forget exactly how I wound up communicating with you guys. It was probably through Twitter or something. But yeah, I mean, I was already a fan of you guys because after 2008 and everything, I just felt like a lot of people that I needed to figure out this area of society that I never quite understood, which was, finance and banking. Like I never really understood it. There was no one in my family who had any advice about that stuff. It was just we were artists. So
Yeah,
I
you
started
know what it
watching
was?
your guys' show. Yeah, and I
I tell
started
you
watching
exactly
your
how it
guys'
happened.
show.
I got an
What?
unsolicited email from you. And I have
That's
no
what
idea how
happened.
you got my email address. I guess you just decided it was probably an obvious one. And, you introduced yourself, and I showed Stacy this, and I'm like, this has got to be fake. This has got to be fake. But, I mean, it doesn't really sound fake. So then we arranged to meet in Paris, and that's how it all got started.
And it's all history after that. We had a nice time. But yeah, and then I did sort of have a painful experience just losing some Bitcoin like early on, and that sort of scared me because it was my own ignorance though. It was my own ignorance. But in those days, there weren't all these wallets that you could have, cold wallets and all this storage and stuff. So I just was stupid and like left it on one of those public sites and just forgot about it and then didn't check on it until it was in the news that I should. And anyway, but yeah, I mean, I'm definitely orange pilled. I mean, because I feel like, especially after watching your series, there was a sort of 10 episodes about Bitcoin. It just makes me feel like it's not so much about an alternative store of wealth or something. It's something much more interesting than that. And that's also why I wanted to come on this show because, you guys have your sort of more respectable economics conversations that I don't even think I could keep up with. But when you told me about the orange pill, like it does interest me in terms of the more esoteric possibilities of where everything could lead in the future. And and what the implications are for like personal sovereignty and like governance and society and all that stuff. Because, you know, everyone like Andrew Yang was talking about, we need UBI and everyone's going to be replaced by automation. And I feel like maybe that's already happening. But one of the things that's interesting about blockchain is the implications it could have for currency and cash and banking and everything, and how that might revolutionize society, but also the unexpected, maybe difficult consequences of it. Like, for example, like I just wanted to ask you, like, what do you think? Like, how is the government going to deal with it? Because people keep saying like, oh, they might just ban crypto or something. But you can't ban crypto. That's the whole point of blockchain. There's no banning it. It's decentralized. It's peer-to-peer. So if they did try to ban it, it would almost be a catalyst for it becoming globally adopted, because then everyone would just be like, what? And for what reason would they ban it? They might ban it because their currency couldn't compete, or there was hyperinflation or something, and they didn't want everyone to just disappear from the grid of finance. So I'm just wondering what you think. Like, what does it mean for statehood? Like, how are they going to deal with Bitcoin? I want to know, because the reason I asked too is because I know, Max, you're trippy and you think about sci-fi stuff all day long. So I want to hear your like vision of the future. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, you know, we've had this conversation a few times. So a similar thing happened with BitTorrent, you know, and when the P2P file sharing decimated the music industry for many, many years. And so the music industry had to reinvent itself, and it came along with new business models like streaming and things like that. And they had to compete. They had to come up with something new. In the case of P2P money, which is Bitcoin, the central banks and the banks are going to have to reinvent themselves. And they are already making moves in that direction. Their traditional style of doing business, whether it's a bank or a central bank, has become obsolete. And the market's moving in a new direction. That's the first answer. The second answer is, if you have a sovereign state like the U.S. decides that they're going to ban Bitcoin, the great thing about it is that some other country will pick up the ball and say, hey, you know what? We love Bitcoin because it's the hardest money ever. We can hoard it. We can do business. We can do trading with any other country in the world without any censorship. The U.S. can't stop us. And we already see this happening in countries all over the world right now. So the U.S., in my view, what's going to happen, you asked me what's going to happen in the future, I think you're going to have what I call the hash war break out. So remember back during the Sputnik days when the Soviet Union put up that satellite, it galvanized America to enter the space race.
A Cold War currency war, like a cold crypto war.
Yeah, pretty much. And the U.S. will have to make a decision. Either it chooses to start to subsidize mining and hoarding of Bitcoin and be a player in the global hash war, or not. But there's already 2 or 3 countries that are racing ahead right now. So the U.S.
Right, but aren't those
soon.
countries arguably authoritarian, or, you know, arguably bad actors relative to, well, the United States could arguably be considered a bad actor by many too. But I mean, in the great scheme of things like China and Iran, do we want them to win the crypto war?
Well, here's the thing about Bitcoin. You don't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin changes you. Bitcoin is the first really medium of exchange we've had ever as humans that promotes peace over violence, because it is unconfiscatable, because I can have an unlimited amount of Bitcoin that you have no idea what I own, and because you cannot coerce me to give you Bitcoin. You can't steal it from me. You can't go to war against me. I can't go. U.S. has expanded its empire by going to war. If you have no idea how to coerce the value out of my Bitcoin wallet, the only way you can get Bitcoin from me is to offer me something I'm willing to trade with you for in Bitcoin, and that's peace, not war.
Sure, I hear you, but the implications of what you're saying, which obviously I like. I'm a pacifist. I don't know why some people don't assume that I am, but I am. I mean, both my parents were pacifists, and I don't believe in initiation of force. You know, self-defense is okay if it's legitimate. But the implications of what you're saying is not just that Bitcoin will usher in arguably an era of peace, because you can't coerce money out of people if it's living in their heads. Well, there might be ways, but it's a lot harder. The other implication of that to me would be the fall of statehood itself, which I think would imply that they must be really scared of Bitcoin, and you know, which also worries me. But at the same time, I know they can't destroy Bitcoin, but what couldn't they do? And would you agree that, you know, if a country, well, most countries, you know, they can coerce their population, they can coerce others into engaging in warfare, which would support the military industrial complex. If Bitcoin allows people so much personal sovereignty that they no longer can be coerced by a government, then what's going to coerce them to pay taxes and uphold a statehood? Is it just going to be the end of statehood? I mean, I'm even scared saying this.
Yes, it will
on
be the
your
end of
show,
statehood.
but-
Statehood is a relatively modern invention, and it was useful for a time, but it's
But what do you
outlived
mean
its
relatively
usefulness.
modern? I mean, compared to like a Homo habilis or something?
As compared to the medieval times, which were feudal lords, we then had the
Okay.
Enlightenment, which gave way to the modern nation state as we know that. And now we are going to see the dissolution of the nation state, the central
Sorry, I
banking-
just assumed that like when I say statehood, a king is a head of state. It's just a different kind of state. It's just
Right. Well, when
run by
when
one
you say
guy.
statehood or I hear statehood, I'm thinking about the social contract, which was, an idea that was written a
Right.
lot about John Locke, who was one of the founding fathers of the Enlightenment, who created this idea. And the Constitution is one. How do you establish balance between government and the governed? What are the rights you give up for what the government is offering? And there's a social contract. And
Right.
that's kind of what we see in different countries around the world. And part of what the state does is create the money. But Bitcoin, for the first time in history, Sean, separates state from money. That's never happened ever in our history. It's always been state money or the king's money. It's all been centralized. This is the first time ever when state and money have been separated. It's like when you separated state from church. You had a remarkable revolution of thought. This is the separation of money from state, which is bringing in another huge revolution in thought. So what takes its place, I think, will be more localism, more regionalism, more tribalism. You'll have more.
Well, it's interesting because when you say decentralized, I agree. I mean, and that's sort of the catchphrase for what happened with Napster in the music industry and what social media is doing. And everyone in Silicon Valley, they're always like, oh, how do we decentralize this industry? Or like, how do we disrupt this industry? Like, that's sort of like what everyone's trying to do. But so I guess I'm just wondering, it seems like Bitcoin could disrupt the financial industry and ultimately the military industrial complex, which seems really terrifying to me. I don't mean to be like a scaredy cat, but it's just like, whoa, what's going to happen in the last throes of those institutions trying to keep power? I just wonder what's going to happen.
I think what will happen is more and more people inside those institutions are becoming Bitcoiners. So we just have now a senator in Wyoming who's actively going out there promoting Bitcoin. She wants the state of Wyoming to become pro-Bitcoin. The state of Wyoming has already passed legislation and laws to make it pro-Bitcoin. Wyoming could secede. They could say, we're leaving America. We're going to start our own country. And they should do it. They could see that with more
Right. The states that are like investing in crypto now arguably could wind up being more wealthy than the whole country eventually.
Yeah, especially since fiat money is collapsing.
But I also think, we started talking about the Renaissance, and think about the age of the Renaissance. It followed upon the bubonic plague. And
Yes.
part of why the institutions, the equivalent of the nation state, the organizing power of the time was the Catholic Church in Europe. And so they presided over dark ages now looking back. But when they
Right,
had...
and the peasants, there so many peasants died that suddenly it wasn't cheap to hire peasants, and the peasants could demand some kind of salary increase, and that was the beginning of the potential for unions and civil rights and all that stuff. I know, and I think about the parallel between this pandemic and the bubonic plague. Not that it's the same kind of disease, but it's had a global impact, and obviously my most optimistic side wants to say, this is going to lead us to a new renaissance, but it's certainly a painful road into the renaissance from the bubonic plague. And they already released this World Economic Forum teaser trailer about a future where there's no private property, and they're just like, don't worry, we'll seize all your property and we'll give you a lovely puppy. Don't you like puppies? Like, it's so creepy. And didn't they delete it already? Like, they put it up for a month and then they got scared because everyone was like, wait, we don't want the New World Order. And they're like, no, we didn't mean that. Like, that was a mistake. But I feel like it could lead to a renaissance, but it could also lead to this kind of power grab where, the global banks release some kind of global crypto that replaces all fiat currencies, and everyone gets enslaved into a new cryptocurrency that's the opposite of Bitcoin, that it actually tracks everything you do, and you could never do anything privately. And I mean, that's sort of a worst case scenario, isn't it? And it seems that's where it's headed for a lot of people.
But that's exactly what happened back in the Middle Ages, before in the Dark Ages leading up to the Renaissance. Is the Catholic Church, what did they do when their authority started to wane and people doubted them because they didn't have an answer for the plague, what was happening, why 50% of the population of Florence died? Well, they had the Inquisition, right? Modern Inquisition is these build back better and the Great Reset and all these things they're going to try. But the Renaissance, the ideas are already there. You can't stop it. You couldn't stop Michelangelo. You couldn't stop Da Vinci. You couldn't stop the great explorers heralding from Italy. So that was already set in motion. And a lot of it had to do with what you're saying when you're sensing that there's going to be a disintegration of the nation state. Remember what happened during Italy? It wasn't really Italy at the time, right? It was the city states of Italy, and they had to compete to get the likes of Da Vinci to live there. That Da Vinci and Michelangelo, it was no accident that it happened in Florence, because it was Leonardo the Great, right? It was the Medici family that attracted all these artists there. So you're going to have the same situation now where people, heads of city-states or nation-states, whatever is left over after this, are going to try to get Sean to move to their place. They're going to want to attract the best.
I'm available for hire. I'll paint your Sistine Chapel. Well, I love that story, but the part that I have to go back to is the Spanish Inquisition, whatever parallel we have of that. If that's coming, I don't know, man. Maybe we should all move to Fiji or something. I mean, gee whiz. I do not want to live through an inquisition in America.
No, it's a financial inquisition. Don't worry. It's just they're going to try. They're not going to torture you. They're going to try to torture your savings with inflation.
It's going to be less inquisition and more imposition.
Nice. I like that. So essentially the escape from that will be to flee to Bitcoin.
All right, let me take this up a level. First of all, let's just say, look, you had Copernicus. He came around during the height of the Catholic Church and said, look, the earth revolves around the sun. It's not the other way around. Once that observation was made, you can't unknow that observation. And it was a phase shift. It was a quantum shift. Things just changed utterly and completely. And it was really the beginning of this type of Renaissance thinking. And so let's look at Bitcoin for a second, because in the case of Bitcoin, it's a similar phase shift. It's a similar quantum leap in thinking. It's something that once you get it, you can't unsee it. And this is what I believe to be true. I think that lying dormant in everyone's mind is the ability to take on everything Bitcoin has to offer. And it's been dormant throughout entire history as humans thus far. But when you have a critical mass of people on the network, on the Bitcoin vibration, it will be awoken. And we're going to have what I call the cerebral kind of, or holy dial tone, where it's this mass awakening, this mass realization. And it's a quantum shift in consciousness that we just never go back from. And it's digital, and it has to do with having this absolutely scarce form of money that engenders individual sovereignty and love and peace, as we've already just talked about. And these so-called threats from governments, from nation states, from belligerent actors, they just fade away like a fart in the wind, because they have no agency and no power, and it's over. It's just gone. We need to have that faith to take that step. And many have, and many already are living in a purely Bitcoin orange-pilled life. And it's now happening by the millions. And soon it'll be the critical mass of billions. And then we'll be in this new higher consciousness. And that's it. And we're heading there now. We are living in this time.
I love it, Max. I was waiting for one of those up-ramp kind of monologues from you. They're my favorite. They raise in pitch and volume, and I get all excited. Yeah, no, I mean, the critical mass thing is interesting. It's like the hundredth monkey theory, although I know that was disproven and the macaques had been like brainwashed or bribed or something. But it's a nice idea. And I do think, ultimately it's true. Like, I think, ideas are like a fire. You can't really, once they're out of the bag, they spread like a forest fire. And so there's no putting the Bitcoin cat back in the bag, and I agree with that. But it is interesting though, because I feel like Well, Bitcoin, I know you guys are Bitcoin maximalists. You're a Bitcoin max Keiserist. So I know you're against like any other blockchain or attempt to do decentralized finance or anything like that. But what I wonder then is, how is it possible that Bitcoin could actually become a useful medium of exchange and not just a store of a kind of futuristic store of wealth that transcends, nation states and stuff, but that actually is used for buying and selling things? If the price is arguably, as you guys have said over and over again, arguably might go up to, hundreds of thousands or $500,000 per unit. How is anyone going to want to pay for anything in Bitcoin? If I'm like, you can buy my car. It's like $10,000. Just send that to me in Bitcoin. I think most people would be like, no way, I'm not sending you Bitcoin. I'll pay you in any other way, but I want to keep my Bitcoin.
Well, we're going over to the Satoshi standard. They're right. There's 1 million Satoshis in $100 approximately, last I checked. So it's divisible into 100 million places, the unit of a Satoshi.
Sure, but
so
if I've had one Bitcoin from, for 10 years and then suddenly I find that it's worth, $500,000, I don't even know that I'd want to spend a Satoshi of it. Like, it just feels like this stuff is valuable. Like, let's just keep it. Unless we're in a war or like something extreme, and that's when people start using gold or silver.
The money
again,
goes through stages, right? So it starts off as a collectible, then it becomes a store of value, then a medium of exchange, and then a unit of account. And right now, Bitcoin is a store of value. And as it gets closer to $100,000 a coin, it'll start to shake people out and say, you know what? I'm going to spend 1 Bitcoin and buy a house. I'm going to spend 1 Bitcoin or whatever. In other words, it reaches a point of equilibrium where people start to realize that, well, I've now gotten such a store of this stuff. I'm actually going to buy a house with it. I'm going to buy a boat with it. I'm going to buy my college education with it. So when it achieves a certain threshold, it becomes then more of a medium of exchange. And then ultimately a unit of account, so that everything is priced in Bitcoin. You go to the grocery store, it'll say you owe us 4 million Satoshis for this bag of pretzels or whatever the case is. And you pay using your phone. And it's very easy to use Bitcoin now as a medium of exchange using all these different services. It's used millions of times a day accordingly. So it's just a matter of getting to a place of where the population of Bitcoiners start to realize that at this point, at 100,000 a coin, I'm actually going to buy a house, right? I mean, it achieves that level. It gets to a point where there's an incentive to spend some because of the value. You have so much. You're like, well, I could hoard it for the rest of my life, but I might as well buy a house.
That makes sense. Is there a potential for a greater disparity between crypto holders and non-crypto holders than we even have now between, the billionaire class and everyone else? I mean, if that's really going to be the case, are the people who own Bitcoin now going to be the new kind of ruling class potentially?
Well, there's 2 answers to that. First of all, the
years?
Bitcoin billionaires, I think, are going to be a potent lobbyist in Washington. So they'll have the ability to change laws and make laws because he who has the Bitcoin makes the laws. And if you believe in some social constructs or social welfare type programs, you can build them out of Bitcoin if you want. You can build.
Remember our friend John Perry Barlow who passed away, but I was friends with him when he first went on your show too, and it was funny because I was already your fan, and I spoke to Barlow about that. He was so smart with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and he wrote I guess it was a sort of utopian Declaration of Independence for the internet. I feel like you should write like the Bitcoin Bible or something, because I feel like it's one thing to have the technology, like in the case of Barlow, there was the internet, but he really codified the deeper implications of the internet by writing that. I feel like you should write something like that.
Well, I feel more like Socrates, who didn't write anything, but individually lobbied people like Plato to wake the fuck up. So I talk to people one-on-one. You don't need to write anything I've written. Just listen to my words and get lit.
Man, I do. And I really want to see you in a toga as well. So what about, everyone's so excited about the idea of, replacing the bureaucracy of finance and other business transactions with decentralized smart contracts and all that stuff. And I know that that's sort of the area, that's the arena of Ethereum and what you call shitcoins or whatever. Is there any potential for blockchain technology to basically revolutionize, or as they say, disrupt the financial industry in terms of contracts and that kind of thing?
Well,
Insurance
just like
contracts?
there's use for a spreadsheet. People use spreadsheets all the time. Ethereum is a spreadsheet. It's not money. It will never compete with money. It never competes with Bitcoin. It's a spreadsheet, and you can do stuff with it like any software. And it's an interesting software project.
But Bitcoin is a financial rails itself, and there are things like Liquid which are developing in terms of having smart contracts, because smart contracts were originally embedded very early on in Bitcoin, but it's slow, patient development of Bitcoin, which prevented it from being introduced too early. And that's kind of why Vitalik broke off. He was an early Bitcoin dev, who wanted the smart contracts now. So he broke off. And
he was like editing Bitcoin fanzine or something.
Yeah,
right?
he was. Yeah. I didn't even connect the two. Like, I knew this like 16-year-old kid from Bitcoin Magazine, and then I saw this guy Vitalik, and I was like, oh, I know one Vitalik already from Bitcoin Magazine. I was like, I didn't know.
Yeah, like what are the chances? Which Vitalik? I know like 10 of those guys. No, I just wonder if there's any legitimacy to this DeFi thing, because everyone was talking about it, and now DeFi, I guess, is crashing, and you just think it's going to be like a fair weather trend that's just going to fizzle.
You're going to see a mirroring of what happened in the gold markets for hundreds and hundreds of years. For hundreds and hundreds of years, or thousands of scams to get you to part with your gold. Now there are going to be many, many scams, and they might not even know it, but what they know is they want more Bitcoin, and they're going to create an elaborate Rube Goldberg DeFi project in order to get you to send them your Bitcoin. So that's what's going to happen.
So this reminds me, if the Federal Reserve or any Federal Reserve for any country around the world, if they do try to do their own cryptocurrency, will it be something that they can track who's doing what? Because with blockchain, everything is tracked on the ledger, but it's anonymous, right? So what would how could they avoid blockchain being anonymous? Because I thought there was something inherently kind of that protected your anonymity in the technology itself. Like, are they going to make a different
central banks doing cryptocurrencies? They already do digital currencies, but 98% of all money is already digital currency to begin with. So that's not really new in terms of being a digital currency. In terms of it,
but it's not crypto, right? Like,
right.
it's
in
not
terms
encrypted.
of being a cryptocurrency.
How does it work?
Right then, it will be centralized. So therefore, it doesn't compete with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is decentralized, and anything centralized by definition doesn't compete with Bitcoin. So it's going to be. So
they're not going to do a blockchain crypto.
They will be, but it'll be centralized, just like all these other.
How do you centralize a blockchain? I thought blockchain meant that there were different nodes and they were spread out.
No, you don't need nodes. No.
No.
On certain blockchains. But also what the Federal Reserve wants to do with these central bank digital currencies, they're called CBDCs, is basically, as you're talking about, at the end of the nation state. They want to go around the Treasury, around the US government, around governments, and start issuing money directly to citizens. So you, Sean, would be able to open your own account at the Federal Reserve, which only banks do now. So they would be able to deposit within seconds, money to your account, their digital currency. So that's what they're doing, an end run around elected officials.
Right. With Bitcoin, the nodes are engaged in what's called consensus. So the nodes have the ability to veto anything that's not commensurate with the objectives of Bitcoin. With a central bank digital cryptocurrency, the ability to veto what's happening at that central bank currency would be moot. Because it would come with the backing of the state authority. You're recreating fiat money and the problems of fiat money, and the fact that it's, as Paul Krugman of the New York Times said, the U.S. dollar is backed by violence. That's what he said. So a central bank digital cryptocurrency is also backed by violence, and the market will reject it if it has as an alternative a fully decentralized, running by a consensus algorithm, Bitcoin. So number one. Number two, Bitcoin is pseudonymous. It's not completely anonymous. There's ways to hide what you're doing, certainly, but it's actually, everything is open source and on the blockchain, so you can see everything that's going on. It's not anonymous like cash is anonymous. wads of cash in a
But they're
briefcase
working on it
is
with-
anonymous. There are now second layers to Bitcoin where they increase the fungibility and they increase the anonymity, and that's yet to come, and that's in the works. But a central bank cryptocurrency will be centralized, and it will be also a way for the state that issues it to track every single thing you're doing. That's correct. There'll be complete transparency of your entire life will be visible by the issuer of that cryptocurrency, the state. That's absolutely right, and that's why it needs to be rejected.
And won't that force a lot of people then to finally adopt Bitcoin?
Yes, I agree. I think
they
it
must
will.
they must be smart enough to know that. So
They're
how
not
are they going to
smart.
balance?
They're not smart. They are academics. They are in places of prestige and influence, and with a certain amount of cachet, but they are not smart in that sense. They don't. I mean, again, you go back to the priests of the medieval days. They were considered to be the smartest people in the world, and yet they didn't know what the hell the relationship between the sun and planet Earth was. And when that was pointed out to them, they freaked the fuck out. Same thing with these so-called smart people that run the IMF, the World Bank, central banks. They say we're so smart, and yet they don't understand what's going on whatsoever. And that's clear by the things that they say and the actions that they take.
What do you think then about this Great Reset idea that's been, publicly acknowledged? I even heard about it on BBC World Service Radio. I mean, because when I bring it up, a lot of people are like, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory." I'm like, it's not really a conspiracy theory if, BBC mentioned it and there was a paid-for advertisement that sort of showed this woman with no property and talking about how great it is that she doesn't own anything. What do you think of that in the context of Bitcoin? And also, I don't understand what they mean if no one owns anything, because then somebody does own it. Doesn't it imply that the state owns all of that stuff? And so it's not like you're getting rid of property. You're just saying private citizens are slaves and own nothing, but the state owns everything. Isn't that what they're proposing, and why?
Two answers. So first of all, the second one is you don't own anything. So basically what they're saying is they want to go to an Uber Airbnb model where nobody owns anything. It's all rental agreements and short-term.
But Uber owns the
they
driver
do. I'm just
owns
saying
the
that
They
car.
own the software.
But for you as the citizen, you will pay a subscription to your country. You pay your annual America subscription. And for that, you'll get housing, you'll get transportation, you'll get healthcare. For your America subscription, you'll pay every year like Netflix.
So basically, they want to turn America into like a Spotify platform.
Yes,
where
exactly.
You,
that's what it means.
Pay to
That's
play.
what that means. Now, as far as the Great Reset, what they're saying is they put that word out there, but they're not giving any detail because they're not sure what to do about it. But what it refers to is that right now in planet Earth, the global GDP is approximately $90 trillion, and the global debt load is over $300 trillion. So what these folks are saying is we've got to figure out how to get this equity to debt ratio back to some manageable level, and they're going to call it the reset. So we have to figure out how to either inflate the debt away, cancel the debt away, or whatever we're going to do. We got to do it on a global basis. It has to be coordinated, and it's going to be a big reset. It does kind of remind us of the Bretton Woods Agreement post-World War II, where there was a global reset against the dollar that was backed by gold. But this reset, we have no details at all. No one's mentioned gold. Nobody's mentioned any details. They just know that there is an extraordinarily dire situation with the global debt versus GDP. And now they've said that we're aware of it. We have no details yet, but we're going to do a reset. That's what they're saying. And if they're too little, too late, there is no reset. You cannot inflate. You cannot cure a problem that comes from having debt money by issuing more debt money, right? They keep issuing more debt money.
Especially because you can't seize gold anymore. Especially because you can't seize gold like they did, in America. I don't think it would be the same, because I think at that time people were very patriotic and they were like, oh, well, if Uncle Sam says they need my gold, I guess they need it. And, whereas now I think people will be like, what are you talking about? Like, you can't, especially if it's Bitcoin, you can't take it, right? So there's no solution like that. So the only other solution to, reducing national and global debt would be to raise taxes, right?
They will. They definitely will raise taxes. And in doing, they will offer the Netflix like Airbnb subscribe to America model and just say, we're not going to raise your taxes necessarily, but we're going to charge you, like Obamacare, for example, we're charged $22,000, $23,000 a year to subscribe to healthcare that at most we might use $1,000 or $1,500 worth of healthcare. So it's a really terrible subscription that was put out there. This will be an equally terrible subscription. They'll say, well, for $30,000, you can subscribe to America and you get X, Y, and Z. And if you can't make the $30,000, then you can temporarily seek shelter in this area where your job going forward will be to click on ads on social media, and you will have kind of subsistence clicking existence where if you click on enough ads during the day, you'll get a protein pill. And we're going to ask you to do that for a few years, and then when you get out of there, we'll give you
people.
Yeah, we're going to give you you'll earn a subscription to America. People will come to America who can buy a subscription. People who can't afford the subscription will leave America, right?
So are you essentially saying if you're not paying your subscription payments to the American streaming service, you won't have citizenship, essentially? You won't exist in the system.
It's like
You'll
China.
Just
It's like the social credit score you'll get.
Right. Which is so terrifying. I mean, that's honestly, I'm sure everyone knows this, but that was actually an episode of Black Mirror. And then it turned out to be real. I mean, it was like a joke on a British sci-fi, like dark sci-fi show. And then that's turning out to be real. And I just find it amazing how so many people talk about civil rights and human rights in America, but those same people never seem to criticize China. And they also didn't support the Hong Kong Democratic Revolution in any vocal or public way. I just find that to be really odd. I don't know if I would say that it's nefarious or because of any, kind of criminal mind. It just seems like the consciousness, like they don't even realize. It seems like they've been sold on this idea of globalism and like everyone's great or something. But it just seems interesting that to me, it feels like a lot of people who claim to care about human rights don't criticize those authoritarian states as much as you'd expect them to.
So let's talk about that. Let's pick up on that word consciousness, because I think that's always the most important word to think of at these epochal sort of shifts. Right now, I think we're going through the fourth turning and a Thucydides trap. China is rising while the U.S. is declining. China, of course, has been like the superpower of the world for thousands of years over the past 3,000 or 4,000 years. So let's talk about the role of the artist in this, because every period has their own sort of, the Renaissance, we had Michelangelo and Da Vinci and Titian and like great artists, and Botticelli, and also the discoverers, the wandering the world on a, in
Marco
a boat.
Polo.
Yeah. And then in the French Enlightenment, we had some great authors and thinkers and philosophers. And, I think when we look back, say 500 years from now, like what will this period be? Where were the artists? Is it rock and roll? I think kind of that's a defining music of this era. Music is certainly important for this era versus, say, the Renaissance or the French Enlightenment period. So where are the artists, or is it in Bitcoin? Is it the meme artists?
Well, this is something I think about quite a bit. So people often ask me, especially because I just worked on a compilation for my dad, his 80th anniversary. And so people often ask me about, protest music or music that changes the world or artists who have influence enough to change the world. And I really don't think that we're living in the same kind of culture anymore. And I think it's for a number of reasons. One of them is just exhaustion. I think the average person, including myself, is just sick of hearing celebrities tell us what to think or do. It's just like, we really don't care anymore. And I think in a way, celebrity itself has been decentralized because of Instagram and Twitter. So people can sort of self-publish, gain their own audience. And it's a generation of celebrities that are not necessarily inherently more truthful than, Humphrey Bogart or something, but they're more accessible. And you see them waking up in the morning, you see them going to the dentist. I mean, it's incredible the level of intimacy you have with some of these influencers. And so I think the average young person, to me, seems a lot more cynical in their worship of the big celebrities. And so, when these videos come out where a bunch of Hollywood actors are like, you got to think this and care about this. Most of them are just like, oh my God, like, shut up. Like, just please make another good movie because the last 10 were terrible anyway, right? And I think we all feel that way. And if you compound that with the fact that when Dylan wrote Times They Are Changing and my dad wrote Revolution and Marvin Gaye wrote, What's Going On, a whole album that was a Vietnam protest, everyone was freaking out about that because it was not the job of the pop star to have an opinion that was controversial. I mean, the Beatles were trained to stay within, the parameters of safe family matters. And Barry Gordy, who owned, Motown Records, told Marvin Gaye he shouldn't put that record out because he was just like, we don't take political stances on war. And so when they did come out with that messaging, it was a revolution, and it was like, wow. And, the same goes for the civil rights movement in the 60s. Seeing that stuff on TV and protesters being fire hosed. I mean, excuse my language, but yeah, I guess I can curse. That shit was shocking, Protest was shocking. Protest music was shocking. So it made waves. And then on top of it, media was so centralized. You had like one channel in England. You had like 3 in America. So everyone was on the same pulse. I mean, even when I was young, we had MTV. And whether you liked a song or not, you still at least knew what the song of that month was. And now none of us know. We're completely disconnected. We're all listening to different playlists. So what I mean is, even if people wanted to, cared about, protest music, they wouldn't all look to the same writer for that song anyway, unlike Dylan and the Beatles, right? Where everyone was looking to them for advice. So I think if an artist is going to make impact, it's probably not going to be like a mumble rap song. You know what I mean? It's not going to be like, wow, that mumble rap song, like everyone listened to it and it changed our lives, because, a lot has been said through music and it's been done very well. So we just have a kind of higher threshold tolerance for being impressed, generally speaking. And so I think if art were to influence the world, it might have a chance if it was a video game platform that was just the most popular thing ever. If it was like the Pokemon Go of anti-establishment revolutionary consciousness, like an orange pill themed Pokemon Go, and like all the kids in every city around the world just realize that statehood is violence or something, right? That could happen. Or still film. I think film has more impact because a big movie is still, it's more immersive than a song. So if you really love a movie, it can really give you a profound sense of specific meaning, not just like an emotional reaction, but an actual narrative that triggers a specific philosophical meaning, like the last Joker film, I think really resonated with a lot of people. So I would argue that, I'm a musician, so I'm not really doing myself any favors here, but I don't think music has the same impact. The third level of why, I think I mentioned too, exhaustion and decentralization, but the third level is really has to do with the fact that the industry was also crippled by that decentralization. So the industry doesn't have that kind of power anymore. So I think music has sort of become wallpaper, and that makes me very sad. But, such is the way of things. I think, books are not as meaningful anymore either. And we're transitioning into other media, and I don't know where it's going exactly, but it definitely seems like virtual environments, video game environments, like immersive multiplayer universes haven't been fully explored yet. So in terms of creativity, I think there's always going to be places for the Leonardo DaVincis of their time to revolutionize consciousness. I just doubt it's going to be like a folk song.
You mentioned exhaustion, and as an inhibiting factor, I guess you could say. When you said that, I immediately thought of punk, particularly in England, because of the exhaustion that was felt through Thatcherism, the disenfranchisement of the North, and
also just prog music. I think they were just sick of smart, sophisticated music. It was like Yes and Rush, and everyone was just like, "Oh my God, like shut that crap off! It's so uncool." And I'm gonna play one fucking chord. It was also just a sheer reaction to like virtuosity.
Can you explain to me why Jethro Tull is as popular as he is? I mean, if I listen to classic vinyl on Sirius, they play Jethro Tull is so heavy in the rotation, and I can't understand it. Is he that important to prog rock even that he should be played as often as he is?
I think Jethro Tull is one of those great dividing subjects in society, and I know some people who would rather die than listen to Aqualung.
I know I'm one of them. I know that I'm one of those people, and
I'm not one of those people.
I think to say that punk is merely a reaction to prog rock, though, maybe misses some of the.
Not merely. I mean, in addition to
right.
Thatcherism.
I mean, but the point is that there was a feeling of extreme. The people were they had the poll tax riots. There was rioting in the street.
But it came out before, like when the England was bankrupt. Remember, they went to the IMF.
Yeah.
They had the 3-day work week. It was chaos there. But also New York City at the same time had punk. It had Andy Warhol. It had
in the 70s
art.
in New York was they had gone bankrupt in the 70s, and New York was a hellhole. I know, I lived there. And so I'm just my question though is that from the fire of that exhaustion emerges the phoenix of some art or artist who uses that energy into this art, and then the art is universally communicable and people understand it because it stirs their soul, and then you have a movement, and then there's a new direction. No,
right? And it feels like whoever Satoshi Nakamoto-san is, then I think. That's art, I mean, I just think I think people tend to assume that art has to be useless, and maybe it does. I mean, I think Oscar Wilde and the aestheticists believe that, like, art has to have no purpose. It just is, like, what defines art is that it's not a jacket or something. So even if you make an incredibly artful jacket, it's not art because it has that purpose of keeping you warm. But I don't know if I believe that. I mean, that's the other thing is I think everyone interesting in 1965, anyone smart or interesting definitely had their ear and eyes on rock and roll because it was like the thing that was happening. So it attracted the greatest minds of that generation, film and music did. Whereas I honestly would argue that probably the greatest minds of this generation are not going to be necessarily attracted to rock and roll anymore. I think they're probably going to be programming, cryptocurrencies or something. So I think the edge of innovation and what's interesting always attracts the smartest and most innovative people. And I just think for a myriad of reasons it's no longer rock and roll. That doesn't mean that I'm not into music. I mean, I do music for a lot of different reasons. One of them was just to kind of develop a relationship with my dad who wasn't around. So it felt like a way of, nurturing some kind of metaphorical relationship with him. But I never did rock and roll hoping to change the world, and it was, but I mean, also for me, it's like hard to be that ambitious, like, because my dad was arguably successful in kind of doing that. So I'm not going to be like, yeah, I'm going to do that too. It would be kind of crazy. It's hard enough to just write a song that's good for me. But generally speaking, my attraction to rock and roll was not thinking this is the cutting edge medium of today and it's going to change the world. I think that's probably naive to think. And I would say that for almost any medium, like EDM or mumble rap, whatever. It's all just stuff. It's all just music and it's great. And I love music. But I think if you want to make something that changes the world, it's probably going to involve technology and computers, Well, to me, first of all, you said mumble rap twice. I have no idea what the heck that is. I mumbled mumble rap. I'm just joking. Mumble rap is just a genre of rap where they kind of mumble. Because for most of my life, like, rap was all about developing your rapping skills
And there was sort of like a steep curve of people's skills getting better and better so they could rhyme faster and say more interesting things in a more interesting rhythm to the point where they could improvise. And then you got to Busta Rhymes and Eminem, and it was like this peak rap. And then the reaction to that, which is arguably parallel to punk, was a bunch of kids coming out and being like, look, we can't just keep trying to speak faster. So how about if we just don't care at all about skill? And we're just like, I'm a rapper.
Maybe Max and I might be able to do that.
Yeah, I think we could probably
Yeah,
master
and
the
so then they
mumble
just
rap.
mumble stuff. I mean, it's kind of a joke, but they just mumble stuff like, yeah, I'm a rapper. Yeah, I'm a gangster. And everyone was excited at first by that, in my view, because it was so cool how much they didn't give a fuck. Kind of like punk. It really was like that. So there is good mumble rap. I mean, I like it, but it's basically like the anti-skill rap. That's what I would say. Not that they have no musical skill, because some mumble rappers are very talented, but it's this idea of just like, that's uncool. Trying too hard is uncool. Kind of like the punk rock ethos. But I wanted to ask you about punk rock, what you think, because you were talking about punk rock as a reaction to Thatcherism, which, you know, is arguably true. I find it interesting then that Johnny Rotten was wearing a MAGA hat. Did you see that?
Yeah. Johnny Rotten is an American conservative living in
It's
Santa
so
Monica.
interesting because he was so anti-establishment, and I just find it curious that you know, he has that opinion, and so many of his fans are just tearing their face off like this is the end of the world, as opposed to kind of seeing it as like, well, maybe this is his version of punk right now.
That it is anti-establishment. Look, the entire establishment, CNN, MSNBC, the State Department, the CIA, the FBI, the deep state, everybody's against MAGA.
Yeah, it is really interesting. It's such an interesting time. And so many things have been flipped upside down. And honestly, talking to you guys about Bitcoin is one of the only things this year that has given me more optimism and happiness about my faith in the near future and just humanity in general. Because I do feel like ultimately you can reduce, and I think you guys have to Bitcoin is something that empowers individuals. It empowers people in a way they've never been empowered before, because, you know, even if they had gold, they would have to carry that in a sack and someone could just steal it from them. But something that transcends the physical world, it means that you have total agency, you have total self-sovereignty. And you don't, you know, as long as you can remember your key phrase, then you're good to go. It doesn't matter if there's a despot that takes over in America. You can just take a backpack with a protein bar and a bottle of water and leave, but you've got everything up here. And I think that is really a beautiful way to look at it. So I find it to be in an ocean of destruction that was this year. I find Bitcoin to give me a kind of optimism, to be honest.
How about Mars? Would you go to Mars on Elon Musk's spacecraft?
Honestly, I think that if there wasn't such a big global debt problem, and if we were just, you know, we had extra money to spend on anything we felt like it would be fun to try to get people to Mars. But the problem is it's so expensive to just bring 1 liter of water, of drinking water, into space, just to get it out of the gravity of space. It's so cost ineffective that I find it to be almost grotesque to send humans in space when 99% of the things that we really need to know initially could be done by robots and arguably be done better. Because if you send robots and AIs into Mars, you know, they could 3D print a city and they would be waiting for us when we get there eventually. But you wouldn't be having to bring food. You wouldn't have to worry about waste and, you know, poo and pee and all that stuff. You wouldn't have to bring water. You wouldn't even have to process water, really. I mean, there must be some for coolant or something. But just generally speaking, I find the whole concept of bringing humans who are the most high, high maintenance objects in the world to Mars, which is the most hostile place, we could imagine in the solar system, arguably, because of the distance, first of all. I think it's quite insane, actually. I think, especially since we don't send people to Mars, I mean, excuse me, especially since we don't send people to the moon anymore. I just find it to be unreasonable. It would make so much more sense to save like incalculable amounts of money and also get more data faster from robots who can deal with a lot more stuff. They can land faster. They can take off faster. They can, they don't get lonely. It just doesn't make any sense to send humans. So I think theoretically it would be nice if we terraformed Mars and we nuked the poles and created some atmosphere, if that's even possible. I don't think it is, because Mars doesn't have an electromagnetic field, which you need to maintain an atmosphere. So I just think we're like 50 years at least, probably 100, maybe 1,000 from sending people there. Just send robots and get data, have them build stuff and analyze the science until it's cost effective to send people up there. Because right now, everyone shits and pisses and eats, and that's just not a system you want in space. That's my feeling.
Well, Sean, you could send your avatar to outer space. That's what I'm envisioning happening when we travel to outer space.
Exactly. But that would make more sense to me, because they don't have to breathe and
right. And if you have
that.
like 5G or 6G or 7G, everything's in real time. Your avatar is traveling through space. You can come and go into the mind of your avatar whenever you feel like it. So you could be like, oh, I'm going to jump into the mind of my avatar now. And now you're on the spaceship and you're landing on Mars. And your avatar is actually landing on Mars. And you can actually feel Mars in a firsthand experience through the telecommunications hookup, if that's obviously would be quite challenging, but assuming that this problem was solved. And I mean, that's one way to go. Plus there's also
a lot of people say that gray aliens are basically robot or avatar suits for physical aliens somewhere else. I've heard
Which
that.
aliens? The gray ones?
The grays, the little ones, the little guys, the famous ones with the bug eyes. And
what do you think of this weird fact that got ignored in the middle of pandemic and Trump, but that Department of Defense is saying like there were some vehicles from outer space on Earth? Like, isn't that crazy?
It's pretty incredible, because that footage it's either faked or it's something off planet, because even the most rational on-planet explanation is that the Russians or the Chinese have invented something that completely transcends the laws of physics as we know them. Like, there's no way that I just don't buy that they could keep that secret. I mean, if any state on the planet was able to make craft that flew in that way, that would mean they would just immediately take over the world. Like, why would they wait? They'd just be like, okay, we're superior. We've invented like wormhole tunneling, and now we're the emperors of the world. So I don't buy that it's possible that it's just some future technology, or even American. Like, a lot of people say like, well, it could just be like the stealth bomber we didn't know about for years. It's like, no, dude, that's not a stealth bomber. That's something that literally transcends, Newton's laws of physics. And so yes, I think it's either totally fake and it's some, some misinformation campaign to distract us, or from something else that's more terrifying, or it's legit. So I don't know which it is.
Well, the difference between today and even 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 500 years ago, nobody from 500 years ago would recognize today. They wouldn't recognize airplanes, rocket ships, telephones.
Well, Keith Richards seems to find his way around pretty easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
So, it just seems like we're bathed in alien intelligence, but we choose not to recognize it.
True.
I just feel like it's all around us. And we just have this idea. We're just too frightened. Humans are still in the cave. We're still cave people. We're very, very frightened of the truth.
Well, you think of cognitive dissonance and stuff like that. We just choose to, like, nobody covered it in the media. Like, the U.S. Department of Defense said there were aliens.
Well, it was on CNN a few times.
Oh, really?
And yeah, those videos were on CNN, and they had this one guy who claims to have worked for some secret government entity that was looking into UFOs. They don't call them UFOs for there. I think they call them something aerial phenomenon, or unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAF, which is so much less catchy than UFO. Like, why change it? But anyway, yeah, I saw that guy talk. I mean, people either say that he's been completely discredited and that it's a misinformation campaign, or that he's legit. It's one of the two, and I just don't know. What do you think, Max? I'm sure you've heard then, you were saying that we're bathed in alien technology, and I think you meant that metaphorically, but literally people say that the integrated circuit like magically appeared after the Roswell crashes happened. Meaning that it's possible that we harvested some remnants of this technology from the spacecraft, and it created this technological boom. And arguably the reason there's such a gap between our readiness for technology and how technologically advanced we are is because it literally was off-world. Do you think that's possible?
No, I think that this became very apparent during the 1990s with the introduction of the internet. I think that we are approaching what I guess you could call the hive mind. I think that all of our minds will be connected in real time, and the massive cerebral power of having billions of minds working in a network situation will just totally redefine reality in a way that we can't, it's really hard to comprehend. I think one way to look at it would be such base emotions like fear and ego instantaneously evaporate, for one thing. And think about the freedom of that. If you had no ego and no fear, think about where you would be in your mind today. I mean, a lot of artists, for me, artists are always about removing that fear. When you see great art, it lifts your fear. The feeling you have when you see great art is that fear leaving your body.
Well, and arguably the original Orange Pill was about that, dissolving barriers and overcoming fear as well.
I mean, the Orange Sunshine.
Yes.
Right, the acid. Well, I think we just saw a great documentary on Orange Sunshine and the acid movement of the 60s and Timothy Leary and what the people were saying at that time. Again, during a great anxiety and during the war, people reached to this acid, to this drug, and for
mind expansion
and this type of thing. And
but it also dissolved boundaries.
Boundaries, right? And the doors of perception were removed. And Aldous Huxley talked about that. Of course, the Doors, the rock group, took the name from that. So all the barriers were removed, right? So, and that was done, and it's been so. I think it's something we have a deep spiritual need for. And I've always experimented with different ways. I think all the various organized religions try to do that, and none have succeeded yet. I think they're all still they're still grasping at that, trying to create a spiritual connection. But now I think so. I think that's what art does. I think that's what we're on the cusp of doing. So this idea of aliens and intelligent life, etc., is on the other side of this door. And when we finally meet the aliens, we won't care anymore, because it'll just be, it'll be
us. It'll be us.
We are the aliens.
But my question is, you kind of imply that, we might be able to upload our consciousness either to an avatar in space or just generally to like a kind of interweb of the global consciousness. Doesn't that presume that consciousness is something that could be replicated in a binary substrate like ones and zeros? And if it is something that can be replicated in ones and zeros, then doesn't that imply that there's no free will? And so I guess my question would, because free will would mean that things aren't perfectly causal.
Right. So I think yeah, I would agree that.
Do you believe in free will is my question.
Well, I think it is something that you could upload. I think it is binary. I think it is have those characteristics. And I believe this is what I would say about free will. It would be like a plant facing the sun. Some plants, for some reason, don't face the sun, and they don't get the nourishment, and they don't grow. We as humans, we can choose not to face the sun, not to face spiritual enlightenment, not to face this understanding of communal enlightenment, and that's your free will. You can choose not to accept the universal enlightenment. That's your will to do so. Or you can choose to face in that direction and accept this transcendence, this transmogrification from your mortal self, from your mortal coil, as Shakespeare
Sure, but I
would
guess
call
what
it.
I was implying is because a lot of the smartest people, like the Sam Harrises of the world, the Elon Musks of the world, just think that free will is an illusion, a byproduct of the complexity of our brains, but that actually everything is causally linked in such a precise way that from the first Big Bang, from the moment of the Big Bang, every relationship between every particle, including the ones in our bodies, were predetermined by the logic of physics and the logic of the universe being consistent enough that we actually don't have a choice, that there's only one fate, that every choice I make, every time I say, oh, I'm going to turn left or right, is just an illusion that's a byproduct of this complexity, but that actually I could have only turned left at that moment, and that I have no free will, and essentially that I'm an automaton with this sort of hallucination of being a free agent. And
I would say the variable is time. So people can choose to have instant karma right now or not. And a lot of people don't because they enjoy the graft. They enjoy the work. They enjoy the satisfaction. They enjoy putting in the hours. But none of that is required. Instant karma can happen at any time. And therefore time would cease to exist because you have now joined into the spiritual being that is all of us, and we are all one. But you may choose to spend more time in your in that other state. So time, therefore, is a variable that we have a free will to determine at what point do we join the spiritual universal consciousness. Do we do it right now, or do we wait for whatever reason we might? But we, the mechanistic aspect to it, and as you're describing it, in terms of all fate is pre-programmed, it's in the atoms, it's a video game, we're all playing Pac-Man, and that every decision has been pre-cooked. I think that I do not agree with that because
I don't agree with it either.
I would, in my view, the palette, the color palette of reality is of infinite hues, and that everyone is mixing their own paints to their own vision in their own way, and that it all fits together beautifully at the end of the day if we wanted to, or it can be discordant. We choose our own discord. We choose our own shadows. We choose our own anxiety for whatever reason. And others choose to feel instant karma right now. And obviously, there's a lot of pressure in our modern society to put up as many obstacles as possible to create as much friction as possible, because that at that point is where you find toll booths. People have tolls. They're toll collectors. Our media there's a toll collector to our media. We're not making our own media at home. We're not cooking our own. We're not making blankets. We're not self-contained. It's all through toll booths, and they all charge for that toll. That's why you hear about this reset. It's going to be a subscription to America. You pay us an annual subscription, and we supply all the things you used to do for yourself anyway, but now we're going to charge you for it. But all that can be avoided. And getting back to Bitcoin returns the sovereignty of self to the point where everyone can simply decide, yes, today I'm making the hive mind real. I'm going to join that spiritual epiphany that gives me peace. And with peace is a world of difference. Peace is a much different world than the world of war and violence. It's just a completely different world right here on planet Earth.
Amen to that. I'm reminded of the story of the Buddha when he became enlightened. He basically could have just transcended space, time, and lived in this universal consciousness. But what he chose to do was to return to the world and help people basically get closer to enlightenment themselves. So I think it's interesting, this idea that what you're talking about, that you could, through meditation or whatever, through some technology, unknown technology, upload your consciousness and really transcend your ego entirely. But I think the interesting story of the Buddha, and I guess of Jesus, he goes to the desert and he comes back or whatever, these metaphors seem like an important step is to actually not only reach this kind of transcended ego state, but then also come back to the world. Because I think it is important to do both. Like I don't think you're doing the right thing if you just completely abandon the world. Like I think the reason you transcend your ego is to have a better perspective for when you return to your family and your friends and whatever you're doing in your life.
Right. So that would be an argument against a certain fatalistic pre-programmed destiny. You're saying
But
that...
it's also kind of a little bit, I guess I'm suggesting that I'm wary of uploading my consciousness to a mega computer with everyone else. And I'm also wary that it's even possible, because I think free will itself, if you believe it exists, sort of means that the purely causal system of ones and zeros and a binary computer system is not enough to replicate our consciousness, because if we were simply ones and zeros, then we would be purely causal and there would be no free will.
Right. To be clear, though, I'm not suggesting to upload one's mind to a computer. I'm saying that what exists right now, and this stems from the conversation about bathing in alien intelligence, is that there's a lot of spiritual quanta, the spiritual aspects to our multi-dimensional reality that we have yet to tap into. And once we do, it's transcendent, and that the idea of the computer itself will seem foolish, that
I'm with you on that.
Okay, so we can join. I mean, people have it with couples, and when they're in love, when they have relationships, there are moments of where the transcendence, where the sum total of that relationship is greater than the sum of the two parts. It's bigger than the sum of the two parts. Okay, and how do you get there? It's through this love, and love in a relationship, it means different things to different people, but essentially
it definitely is universally.
But you don't lose yourself entirely in the
prioritizing
relationship.
someone else over you. Like, I think love universally is a loss of ego to a degree, because you suddenly someone else takes the importance that your ego would normally have.
Right. So I can go in and out of my relationship with Stacy. I don't lose Max Keiser, doesn't disappear. I can commute back and forth between the relationship, which is
with
the
no
greater
toll booth.
sum, and Max Keiser, who's the individual, and you need both. You can't, I wouldn't want to just dissolve into the relationship and lose Max Keiser, because the relationship works because of both sides of the equation are weighted, I guess you could say, in that equation, and both sides are looking at each other. I'm looking at Stacy, Stacy's looking at me. And then we have the relationship, which is the sum of both of us, but we don't lose our individual aspect to it, because that wouldn't work either. So it works together. So I'm saying that as far as the relationship of all humanity, if you can commute into the global consciousness and still be yourself, like you have a relationship with the world. Yeah. Like right now.
Well, I find it really interesting too, because what you're reminding me of now is how consciousness itself, as far as we understand it, is really entwined with the physicality of our left-right hemisphere design. There's something really interesting about it. And I think I actually read this book called The Master and His Emissary, which was a book about neuroscience. And it talks about how essentially the right brain, which is, they say generally is creative and doesn't have language, should be the master of consciousness, and the left brain should serve the master. The left brain was designed to sort of locate a mouse in the room and grab it if you're an eagle or something. It's about objects and language and compartmentalizing infinity into something that's digestible and communicatable. Whereas like the real reality is infinite and non-compartmentalized, and that's how the right brain sees it. So the right brain is almost like the enlightened brain, and the left brain is sort of like the material world.
Right,
brain.
and that's that piece of the brain that goes down the middle is making a market in reality. It's buying and selling.
Corpus callosum.
Right, it's buying and selling from both sides of your mind to create what you perceive to be reality. But you need both sides.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is it has to do with bandwidth. I think there's an actual bandwidth of the corpus callosum, which is arguably why we had to create words or concepts, because we'd have this infinite feeling in the right hemisphere, but it actually has to collapse through this band of neurons to get to your left brain, and that's how it sort of forms into a compartmentalized reality. But what's interesting about this book is he says the master and his emissary is being upturned because essentially there's a sort of mutiny from the left brain, because a post-industrial society has incentives and reward structures for left brain thinking. accounting and manufacturing and a 9-to-5 job and linguistic skills and math skills, and that there's a lot of good because of that. But ultimately what it means is that the left brain is taking over the right brain, and that's arguably critically dangerous for humanity, because the other thing about the left brain is that only the left brain can sort of conclude that things suck and it wants to kill itself. Whereas the right brain is purely survivalistic. The right brain is like what makes you jump when you notice a tiger out of the corner of your eye and haven't even computed it yet. Your right brain is like, no, you're jumping and running before. The right brain would never logically trap itself into some negative, dark depression hole. It just is a pure consciousness. So I find it interesting because, well, it relates to everything you're talking about in terms of transcending ego and the balance that needs to be had with like letting yourself go into a relationship, but also losing meaning if you lose yourself entirely. So there's like this balance with our egos, and there's a balance within our heads. Like we have cognitive dissonance, and arguably we're two people. We're these two brains connected by this little wire. And I think there is cognitive dissonance happening in society. I think that it's true that basically the ego mind, like the more rigid, linguistic, compartmentalized, mathematical mind is sort of dominating. And I think it's leading to a sort of crisis of consciousness in society a little bit. And I think it's also being exacerbated by social media and, likes and clicks and being addicted to the sort of click cycle. So I do think it's important to disconnect. I do think it's important to not upload your consciousness to Twitter and essentially spend time meditating and nurturing your sort of inner guru, right? Or whatever, your inner Buddha, because otherwise, it seems like even the political sphere, as an example, is becoming schizophrenic, or as a metaphor, is becoming cognitively impaired, and it's a terrifying moment, and arguably why I spaced out on our last meeting because I was so stressed about the state of the world.
We really need to follow up with this and do a two-way interview and get Nozomi Hayes on as well, because this is her specialty. I don't know if you've seen her. She was in To the Moon. And
yeah, I'm a fan of her. She seems cool.
Yeah, she's a liberation psychologist and talks about these two parts of the brain all the time, and how Bitcoin, basically harmonizes them. That it turns all the things that we fight against in our Western societies, like all these structures and institutions developed to keep down the fear and greed and all the negative sides of the human nature. Whereas Bitcoin invites that greed to create altruism. For example, you secure the network for millions of people around the world altruistically out of your greed. Like, so you secure this network. And I think it would be because this is on her wavelength. So I think it would be,
I would love to.
It would be an interesting conversation.
Oh, and by the way, I don't know if you guys have titles, but Bathing in Alien Technology, pretty good title for this episode.
Okay. That's a good one.
All right.
You said that enough times. I was just like, man, if I saw a podcast with that title, I wouldn't care what it was. I'd be like, clicking on that.
Right. And so answer for the Orange Pill Podcast Telegram group. When's the full album coming out?
Yeah, well, it would be a concept record, which is interesting. To be honest, I haven't thought of it, but we'll see. I'm open to it.
Well, what about this Claypool Lennon delirium
concept
south of reality? It looks like a giant bug on Mars. I mean, it's a stranger to these types of things.
Yeah, well, that's the flea. That's the flea on the back of a dog. But the idea is that a flea might think the back of a dog is a planet. So he's looking out and he's exploring the planet, but little does he know he could be shaken off at any moment.
Wow.
Well, thank you for blowing our minds with this consciousness-raising content.
Yeah.
What was the name of the episode again?
Bathing in Alien Technology.
Bathing in Alien Technology.
Yeah, bathing in alien intelligence.
Technology.
Technology. That's it.
Max's nap time.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, I might shower in alien intelligence later, but this morning I took a alien technology bath.
Well, that was a great interview with Sean Lennon.
I agree. He's a great artist, and to travel to the far reaches of the Bitcoin universe with Sean was a real treat.
Right. And again, I was thinking during the break while, we had pre-recorded that interview, I was thinking of something that, these epoch changing, the consciousness shifting, these moments into the Renaissance, moments into the Enlightenment. One thing that when Max and I lived in Paris, we lived near the Jardin des Plantes. And there is in the Jardin des Plantes, there is a museum of paleontology. And there's something that's always stuck with me from there. And that is that, here in the early 18th century, as Paris is developing into this, the big city that we know, the builders at that time, and remember, this is a Catholic run society and the church knows all. And this is before the encyclopedia and knowledge spread to the ordinary person, that the workers, when they were digging to build some of these structures, they found under the ground, they found some dinosaur bones. And these dinosaur bones shocked them because there is nothing in the Bible. The church never taught them about these monsters. So they went to the church asking for answers like, what are these huge creatures that were here? You've never told us about them. And the Bible is supposed to be the history of man and all of history. So why is it not in here? And they started to doubt authority. They started to question the church. They started to question the nature of the reality they thought was around them. And that, to me, feels like today, that we're starting to question the reality of the monetary system around us because we've discovered Bitcoin. We found Bitcoin, and the existence of Bitcoin calls into question the reality of the fabric of the monetary system around us.
Yeah, so it's a conflict between divide and conquer and universal consciousness expansion. And whether it's the discovery of fire or Gutenberg Press or Diderot's encyclopedia or the internet or Bitcoin, it has this universal global consciousness expanding quality that totally challenges the authorities that rely on divide and conquer. You see it in the United States, the various tribes and the cable news tribes and the political tribes. The authoritarians want to keep that conflict going, and they feed that conflict as much as they can. And then when something comes along that unifies everybody, it could be a great orator, it could be a great speech, it could be a great technology, it could be Bitcoin. Then the consciousness takes a leap forward. So the bones, the dinosaur bones were part of that whole recognition that maybe what we've been told is wrong, and it set, the history on a different path, didn't it?
Yeah, and Obama said something this week as he's pushing his book. He says that the internet is the greatest threat to democracy, and that the Democratic Party needs to start working with the elites of Silicon Valley to make sure that the ordinary deplorable people aren't able to access any information that they, the elite, deem to be true. But as I'm pointing out, here for hundreds of years, the elite authorities, those in positions of power, the Silicon Valley of its day was the Catholic Church. So here they're trying to say, we can never uncover new truths. We are limited by what we, the elite, know today.
Right. Obama, as a constitutional scholar, would know the concept of the right to assemble. And if you're going to silo everybody on the internet to their own private little quarters and not allow them to congregate and assemble, that is about the most anti-constitutional, anti-American thing anyone has uttered in the last 20 years, even from Obama's many anti-American utterances. That stands above the rest.
Well, again, I just think that our reality is always shifting, and that's part of the problem, is that we're always looking head on at the mathematics, at the structure of the economy or the monetary policy or the government, but then out of your peripheral vision, you see something else, and that something else might be the truth. So you start to try to see what you're seeing out of the corner of your eye, and looking over there kind of
Right.
shifts
The cliche being that the priests in the medieval times would concern themselves with how many angels could dance on the head of a pin, right? So that's the minutia. That's like, we're going to mathematically figure out how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. That would be like in the Bitcoin community, like, well, the nonce is adjusting based on this algorithm and the protocol and this input and that output and this stack but they don't many times see the spiritual aspect or the game-changing, life-changing, societal-changing aspect of the protocol. Which you find that a lot. You find that a lot in technology all the time. People don't really understand the ramifications of the technology. And that's why we need philosophers and poets and men of spiritual grit to help to be a, what do they call that in the Orange Sunshine? They hold your hand while they trip
sitter.
A trip sitter. We need trip sitters because the Bitcoin is so mind blowing. You need a trip sitter. You need a quote unquote influencer to hold your hand while like Ray Dalio needs a trip sitter. Right now he's curious. He's bit curious. He realizes, what? All my peers are killing me, in performance. Why is that? Well, they're buying Bitcoin and I'm not. I better look into this. So you need a trip sitter, a bit sitter for Ray, to help him cross over into the promised land.
Well, again, we keep on going back to this metaphysical divine thing, and that is, consciousness is metaphysical and divine. It's not something that can be mathematically quantified. Nobody knows what consciousness is, right? So there is the divine in us right there. The fact that no scientist, no physicist, no doctor can explain to you what exactly consciousness is.
It's like the sound. You weren't looking at the sound and it wasn't playing. But now that you're looking at the sound, it's playing. You see, it's just the quantumness of sound quality.
What Max is talking about there is that we have this Focusrite audio interface, and the audio interface has developed a blip whereby the 48 volts, which we need to power these mics, goes off randomly. And that is like, you have to keep on looking at it. Usually in quantum physics, if you look at the photons won't behave as you want them to. You have to not look at the photons for the photons to go through at the same time. Remember, two holes, that experiment. And that shows consciousness down to like
this is Schrodinger's microphones. Yeah, I mean, these photons are so tiny, and yet consciousness could fit inside them. They're aware of you observing them. So Bitcoin is made up of a huge protocol and a blockchain. So, the fact is there's consciousness in it. That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
and Knut can Knut me. I don't know what that means.
Canute. Remember that ad campaign from the 60s? Canoe. It was for a men's fragrance called Canoe.
Well, speaking of looking at, many people have been asking about Madge. Madge has disappeared for the last few weeks. She's been sunbathing down in Florida. And people have been asking, where is Madge in her deep, wide box?
That sounds like a double entendre.
Well, Madge likes box. She talks about this, and she is a famous sticker in
Are
our
you saying
Orange
Bach
Belt.
or box?
Box, B-O-X. It's a word women use for their vagina, their box.
Oh, okay. So it's not a double entendre. It's just a reference to one's vagina.
It's a reference to one's vagina.
Oh,
so
okay.
Madge Weinstein is picking up on this whole theme of, bathing in alien technology. She has a piece about bathing in COVID hypocrisy, part of the smug industrial complex whereby, they're better than you deplorables, you do another thing.
Hi, Max and Stacy. Guess what? Our fucked up reality is bathing in COVID hypocrisy. Here's the deal. Well, I voted for Biden and Biden won. Biden is the last neoliberal I will ever support, unless he does something like Medicare for All or Green New Deal, which he won't. So after this, I'm just going all socialist or nothing. So fuck it all. Fuck all. Fuck all. Fuck all. Fuck all. Fuck all. And right now I'm in Florida visiting my mother because she hadn't had a visitor in almost a year. And life goes on. And I feel somewhat of a hypocrite because I believe in, all the COVID restrictions, and I mask and I distance with the socialists and all that sort of thing. But, life goes on. My mother wanted company. And honestly, I wanted to see her too, and I wanted to go to the fucking beach. So I'm a hypocrite. So I'm part of this COVID hypocrisy cat shit. Cat shit. Alien cat shit. I wonder if aliens shit. Maybe aliens have litter boxes. They're so evolved. Maybe cats are aliens. I don't know. Listen, that's not even the point. I've already talked for a minute, and you wanted me to keep this under 4, so I got to talk fast. Trump's a mess. We all know that. He hasn't done a goddamn thing about COVID except for signing off that project, whatever it is, Warp Speed, which has been very successful. I don't know how much of that is his fault, but you got to give him credit for the couple things he does right. Signing that, I guess, worked. So, okay. But, meanwhile, since he lost the election, all he does is obsessively tweet about himself and saying absolutely nothing about COVID. He doesn't give a shit. But you know what? He also doesn't pretend to. So the small booby prize is that at least he's not being a hypocrite. He's just being a monster. I got to be an honest lesbian at some point. But speaking of lesbians, albeit not quite honest ones, can we talk about my home mayor, Lori Lightfoot's? Or as I like to call her, Gordon. Here's the thing. Wait a second. Did I just do a Bidenism? Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. My niece, Hunter Biden, wants to... Never mind. Listen, Max and Stacy, let's talk. Let's talk. I'm just forgetting what I'm going to say, so I'm just wiggling around. I know you went to this under 4 minutes, but this is just take one. I'm just going to work my whore hole a little bit. I got to loosen up. Got to get it all. I just look so darn good in this image. I don't know. I can't get over how pretty I am right now. Max and Stacy, back to Lori Lightfoot. So he posted on Instagram the other day with a cute little graphic, and it said, 1 in 15 Chicagoans right now have active COVID. Stay home. Then I go swipe on my Instagram, and guess what's next? Sidetracks, the big gay bar in Chicago, the biggest gay bar in Chicago, says, Wednesday, November 18th, come join us for Beyonce night. Or maybe it was Lady Gaga night. I don't know, like that. And I'm thinking, what? I had to check the time, the date. I'm like, is this for real? The mayor says 1 in 15 people have COVID, but then the bar is saying, come on over for drinks, right? At the same fucking time, on the same story thingy. So this is happening in real time. And then I thought to myself, wait a second, because this is right around the corner from my house in Chicago. Starbucks, Sidetracks hosts many of Lori Lightfoot's campaign events, and they were very helpful in getting her elected. So guess what? This bar that supports Mayor Lightfoot's campaign is miraculously open during COVID. Of course, so are other bars, and so are the gyms. But the beach was closed all summer, right? The beach was closed all summer in all phases because the beaches don't have lobbyists. And guess what? Who has lobbyists? The health clubs have lobbyists. That's why they're still fucking open. And the goddamn bars have lobbyists. The restaurant and bar associations have lobbyists. They're still fucking open. So it's all fucking bullshit. It's hypocrisy. Listen, Max and Stacy, I don't know what to tell you. It's hypocrisy. It's COVID hypocrisy. COVID alien autopsy hypocrisy. If this is a simulation, it doesn't make any fucking sense. Why would you simulate all this bullshit? Why would you simulate? I mean, I get why you would simulate COVID because you have to kill a bunch of people because they're ignoring climate change. But why does it have to be so stupid? Just to entertain us? Is entertainment part of the simulation? What for? What does that do? I don't understand it. I don't get it, Max and Stacy. I don't get it. I want answers. And by the way, I understand that Sean Lennon is on this show. What an honor it is. What an honor. What a fantastic artist he is. I follow his Twitter. I listen to his music. Fantastic artist. And I love that he supports this show. But his father, too. When I think of John Lennon, I think of peace. That's what John and Yoko always meant to me more than anything. Peace, right? And I think for me, it's important that when we look at this, what's going on in politics, I see a lot of people on my side, progressive, they'll say, if you voted against Trump, if you voted for Trump, I never want to talk to you. You don't respect my rights, blah, blah. You have no reason for kick you out of my life. And a lot of people want to kick people out of their life because they voted for Trump. I don't agree with that at all. I believe in peace, because when you act like that, you're just starting a war. You can't just block off people who disagree with you. It just doesn't work that way. Even if you believe that I have no right to exist, we still have to live together. And if we don't have peace, then guess what we have? We have war. We can't do that. Have to live together. We're fighting a disease, or we should be fighting a disease. Let's not fight each other for stupid shit. We have to get along no matter what. So, peace.
Well, another brilliant piece by Madge, bathing in the hypocrisy. And, another eagle-eyed social commentary by the one and only Madge Weinstein.
Well, again, bringing this back to the French Enlightenment period is that there was this sense that we are the elite and we want to pour our truth in concrete and never be able to see any other truths, that there's only one absolute truth, and that is our truth. And their truth was that they were the divine king and the aristocrats, and they got everything. You had brioche, you deplorables, and listened to, the Vatican. And that was the world you were able to know. They were unable to explain much of the world around you. All the reality you could see, they were unable to explain because they wanted to stop truth from ever evolving, right? So I think we're at that sort of period right now in the United States because we're the empire, we're the one truth, we're the superpower, we are the one superpower, and we don't want any competition. Why would you want competition to your truth, right? You like the world settled in your image of truth, and nobody else could see the world, even from their peripheral vision, any different from what the U.S. empire can see it.
It's like men who get lost driving. They don't ask for directions, do they? They just keep guessing and driving and getting more and more lost.
Well, who does not get lost is our sponsor, thesunexchange.com/orange pill. And we always like to end on a positive note from Abe Cambridge. He's a positive guy. He sees a world of possibility where other men see impossibility. He sees all that is possible. Here is a clip from him, thesunexchange.com/orange pill, Abe Cambridge.
There is no spoon. There has been some absolutely epic goings on in another land down under, other than South Africa, in Australia. In fact, a 10 gigawatt solar power plant is now under development with 30 gigawatt hours of battery storage. This is being connected by an undersea cable that's 4,000 kilometers long to Singapore that will provide 20% of Singapore's electricity 24 hours a day being sourced from Australian sunlight in the Northern Territories. This is being developed by a company called Sun Cable, and this Australia-Asian power link is going to be deployed by 2030. Now, into the south of Australia, into the state of Victoria, the world's biggest battery pack was installed a couple of years ago by Tesla, but for not much longer because Tesla are about to build the world's biggest battery pack, doubling the size of the previous one. This battery pack is 450 megawatt hours, and for every dollar spent on building that battery pack into the grid, they're going to get $2 of value back. That's just really being able to clean up the electricity supply and deal with the fluctuating amounts of solar and wind in their grid through a battery pack, thus doing completely away with any arguments about going solar and wind and the variability of such. So that's pretty cool. So let's just hope that we can start to curb our carbon emissions, and Australia's Great Barrier Reef, which is very much under threat from ocean acidification and the transportation of coal fuel from Australia to China, that can start to be minimized, because these are global treasures which we must look after, and climate change is being caused by fossil fuels, and we can stop that by transitioning to solar and wind.
Right. So here we have, again, anytime I see one of these videos where they say mega, giga, or kilo, I start to think of Chads. I put them in Chad context. So I know a giga Chad is a lot.
I can't believe it. This is an amazing development. So Australia's going to harness solar energy, pay people Bitcoin. No, that's another project.
That's the sunexchange.com/orange pill.
20% of it goes to
Singapore,
and this just shows that the world is just one big solar reflector, and you just got to harness it. This is what Of course, in that book, Critical Path by Buckminster Fuller, he talks about solar energy being thousands of times greater than we would ever need, hitting us every single day. And it's just a matter of, having the will to harness it and capture it. And the Sun Exchange is doing it. And so are the Australians. And, Australia is a big coal industry country, so this is their entire economy is going to be transformed now because they're going to decelerate the coal and they're going to go into the solar.
So again, like this nature of reality versus what you can see and the possible and the impossible and all the fabric of the universe that we don't even know, the reality all around us, we don't know 75% of it, at least apparently. And so here we have, Buckminster Fuller has always said, despite everybody in the press will tell you, and the press, by the way, is absolute now, right? They want an absolute right of press, that their truth is the only truth, that the Washington Post and the New York Times, as the Twitter keeps on telling you, they're the ones that are arbiters of truth. Well, they'll tell you that we're always energy shock, energy supply, in the future is going to be negative and it's all impossible. We are humans and we're limited to what we know now. But here they're showing, like, Buckminster Fuller is right. Buckminster Fuller says there's no such thing as pollution. There's no such thing as a shortage of energy because the sun is infinite. The energy from the sun is almost infinite, as our physicists
Perfect price discovery. That's what you need. You just match all the inputs and the outputs, like photosynthesis. Perfect price discovery in nature. It takes in the carbon and it exhausts the oxygen in an effortlessly, virtually costless way. And there's no reason why we can't costlessly, on a verge of costlessness, adjusted for your payout in Bitcoin, you're actually making money. You're paying all your energy needs and making a surplus on top of that. Put that in your UBI pipe and smoke it, Andrew Yang. You want UBI in America? How about go Sun Exchange Solar, satisfy 100% of America's energy needs, and give everyone a crypto dividend, Bitcoin dividend every week? Andrew Yang, how about that, you freaking guy?
That is thesunexchange.com/orange pill. So, yeah, like I like that guy, Abe Cambridge. I like, the likes of Elon Musk. Elon Musk gets taunted all day long. He gets told over and over that he can't do this. He can't do that. He can't build these cars. He can't do SpaceX. And then he sends some freaking astronauts to the ice.
He puts a Tesla in orbit playing David Bowie music.
Yeah. So, there are those who will tell you over and over, you can't be a polymath. You can't be a Renaissance man. You can't have an opinion about things you don't know about. But, the fact is the human mind that is infinite in terms of the ability to see things and understand things and imagine things, most importantly.
Adding complication doesn't make things any clearer. The art of concision adds to communication comprehensively, not by adding, like the New York Times will, 3,000 words to say one stupid piece of shitty thing.
Yeah. And it's always pushing war, right? So the sunexchange.com/orange pill, you could sit there and complain from home wherever you are, or you could start joining revolutions around the world, the solar punk revolution, the cypherpunk revolution. Remember, the cypherpunks also, just like Abe Cambridge is a solar punk, solar punks build projects, right? They stop talking and complaining and saying, oh, we're having too much carbon dioxide. Oh, this is wrong. Oh, that is not possible. They just build. Well, the same thing with cypherpunks. They were told you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't use cryptography, you can't, you can't create your own money. And they separated church and state back in the Enlightenment, and they now have separated state and money today. This is the new epochal change. This is divine. This is a divine way of thinking. This is beyond the physical realm, the limitations of
Paul
the physical.
Revere's ride. Learn it. Be it. Understand it.
Right. So that's this episode of the Orange Pill podcast. Make sure to visit thesunexchange.com/orange pill. Abe would like another cocktail party before the end of the year. Go sign up. Maybe we'll start vaping some toad And you never know. Like, we have some fun things on the horizon. And leave some comments about what you thought about the interview with Sean. Welcome him to the Orange Pill podcast group. And again, thesunexchange.com/orange pill. Max, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, vaping, Toad. It's if you live in Manchester, maybe, but be very careful, about that kind of thing.
Sun Exchange is the world's first peer-to-peer solar leasing platform. Earn Bitcoin solar powering communities in Africa and be part of the new world economy. Visit thesunexchange.com/orange pill and start monetizing sunshine today.